All right, last video here for this module on the arts of Africa in the modern era. And I included a link to an Art 21 video where there's a specific clip about this particular artist. This is El Anoutsoui, who builds on a long African tradition of using a wide array of materials in his work. Things like found objects and kind of non-conventional materials in art. So I really hope that you take a look at that clip. It's short, take some notes on it. We're going to focus on his flag for a new world power that he completed in 2004. It's an immense wall sculpture that folds and undulates like a textile, but this is not made out of fibers. It's made primarily of metal, and you can get a little bit of sense of that in the detail here on the left. It challenges our assumptions about art. Is this two-dimensional? Is it three-dimensional? Is it a sculpture? Is it a painting? Is it an installation? Should we call this so-called high art? Or is this more of a craft? This is exactly, I think, El Anoutsoui's goal here. And he uses, as I said, non-traditional art materials. There's bottle caps in here, scrap metal. And he wants to, I think, comment on a re-examination of the world's political systems, thinking about a flag for a new world power, but also to the ever-increasing threat of irreversible climate change and the environmental crisis. His career, he really comes of age in mid-century Africa during the utopian feeling of the independence movement. And he wants to think about, the fraught history of trade between Africa and Europe. He actually explained himself. He said, alcohol was one of the commodities brought with Europeans to exchange for goods in Africa. Eventually, alcohol became one of the items used in the transatlantic slave trade. They made rum in the West Indies, took it to Liverpool, and then it made its way back to Africa. I thought the bottle cap had a strong reference to the history of Africa. Mambunda, he grew up in Mozambique during devastating civil wars of the 70s and 80s. And in here too, this is another artist, I think, who's kind of repurposing materials, but not nearly as mundane as a bottle cap, but he is using discarded weapons to form things that are meant to provide comfort, couches and chairs. When the Civil War ended in Mozambique, there was an estimated 7 million weapons left. And he wanted to use these deactivated weapons of war that carry such strong political connotations to create something beautiful. I think Mambunda wants to convey a positive reflection on the transformative power of art, resiliency and creativity of Mozambique. Mutu was, Wangechi Mutu was born in Nairobi and then educated in the United States. And her, while she is African by birth, I think, a lot of times when we talk about contemporary art, especially when we focus on contemporary art the last 4 weeks of the term, we're going to see how global in nature art is today. Artists live kind of in an international space and often show their work in an international space. And particularly for Mutu, she wants to complicate cultural norms, both in the West and in Africa. She wants to question how we see gender, sexuality, and even cultural identity. For example, Mutu takes images, pictures from National Geographic, pornography, fashion magazines, cuts them up to recreate and to kind of the Black female body that is so that is such a source of fascination, but also fear. It is often maligned in Western society, and the Noble Savage here, Le Noble Sauvage, is a collage that I think um, demonstrates the historic weight of this misnomer. The misnomer being noble savage. It's a term that was coined in the 17th century that designated non-Europeans as primitive, and it served as a reason to discredit them as humans, to discredit their accomplishments. We see a female figure here with almost a kind dark sores appearing on her body and a raffia pattern skirt. It's a little bit of I think there's an element of Afrofuturism in Mutu's collage here. The diseased skin refers to victims of crises in Africa. Again, think about the times we see Africa in the news. It is only really during massive epidemics. And here we see this kind of diseased skin, but a woman that appears strong and triumphant, reaching up to the sky, holding this fern with all sorts of little birds flying around it. And I think here she wants to kind of challenge our assumption as Africa as the so-called dark continent full of disease, and also make us reconsider the Black female body. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I want to be aware of the time. And I think, again, in Mpane's work, we see artists coming to terms with how African people and cultures have been perceived in the West, and the damage that racism and colonialism continues to do and their legacies. So what happens in 1885 is the Congo becomes the personal property of Belgium's King Leopold. This Congo's colonial legacy is a real theme in Mpane's work, and we're going to see another artist here who also deals with this crucial moment of 1885 in a minute. But what we have here is this kind of transparent figure who is made, this figure right here, he is made completely out of matchsticks, and he looms above these wooden silhouettes that cover the floor, representatives of those who have fallen due to this violent history of colonialism. And she chooses matchsticks because of their flammable nature, but also the fact that they're useful. They're kind of everyday objects. The heads of the thousands of matchsticks were also carefully removed before she assembled this piece. I think as a way to kind of de-escalate the situation in a way. And here is another artist, Yinka Shonibare, who is a British-born Nigerian artist who also explores the legacy of European colonialism. And this piece, this installation, specifically references that same event from 1885. This is the Berlin Conference, where major European leaders, including King Leopold, they meet in Berlin with a map of Africa. As these mannequins here, they debate and negotiate over this map of Africa in the center of the table, and they literally cut up the continent about who gets what. Shonibare works a lot in Dutch wax fabric, these bright fabrics that we often associate with, oh, it's indigenously African, but the history of these fabrics is really the history of colonialism. It's so much more complicated. These fabrics were inspired by Indonesian batiks that the Dutch saw in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, and then they went back to Europe and produced these bright batik fabrics, And then they shipped them to West Africa, to their colonies there, where they were sold in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And so there's this complex web of economic, racial, colonial interactions that these fabrics represent. And he takes these batiks and he gives the mannequins, they're using these bright fabrics. They're wearing these kind of stuffy, uptight, aristocratic, coats and tails here. And there's a little bit of a disjunct, I think, between the pattern fabric and the fashion themselves. Shonibare often does these large-scale installations of headless mannequins. And I think that there's a few different things that Shonibare is trying to say here. The fact that, none of these European rulers were actually using their brains. There was a kind of mindlessness in their hunger for cutting up Africa. I think he's also referencing a little bit of the French Revolution too, and the use of the guillotine. Shonibare says, "Theatricality is certainly a device of my work. It is a way of setting the stage. It's also a fiction, a hyper-real theatrical device that enables you to reimagine events from history. Scramble for Africa examines how history repeats itself. And when I was making it, I was really thinking about American imperialism and the need in the West for resources such as oil, and how this preempts the annexation of different parts of the world." And I love how Shonibare is really not just thinking about colonialism, imperialism, capitalism run amok as something that, that's, we've been there, done that, that's long in the past. But he's really thinking about, what does colonialism, what does global capitalism look like today? Who are the winners and who are the losers? And I think he would say there is a lot of the lessons of colonialism and imperialism of the 19th and early 20th centuries are repeating themselves today. We will end with that food for thought, and I look forward to seeing you soon.